Hi everyone, thanks again for joining me. Today we're going to be having a look at Learning Outcome 8, which is the structure and function of the cardiovascular system for the VTCT Level 3 Diploma in Sports Massage Therapies. So we're going to start off by looking at functions of blood. Now, if you've had a look at any of my other videos, you'll see that I like using acronyms. So the acronym for this one is DRAC, which is quite a nice one, because it is related to blood. So D, R, A and C. Starting with D is distribution. So blood is really good at distributing oxygen, nutrients, hormones and heat around the body. In an easy way to think about it, I say distributing the good stuff. So the things that the body requires or each body cell requires. R, it's quite common for most of the acronyms I use, R is removal. So removal of the bad stuff. By bad stuff, we can include carbon dioxide as a waste gas and also other waste products. A is a couple of ways to remember A. I've written it down here as antibody production, or you can think of it as attacking things that shouldn't be in the body, infection, bacteria, microbes, etc. And C is slightly different. C is for clotting. So the blood will clot, becomes a lot thicker, and it will stop it leaving the body via any open wounds or internal damage as well. So it will clot to prevent blood loss. So for functions of blood, think DRAC, and you've got your 4 functions there. Components of blood. So if we were to have a look at blood under a microscope, what does it consist of? I'm not talking about what it carries around, but the 4 main components of blood. So from the pictures, if you can see the pictures, starting with the top one, there's a bag of straw-coloured fluid. So that's the part that makes blood into a liquid in fluid form, and that's called plasma. So plasma makes up 55% of blood in total. The remaining 45% of blood volume is all the other cells that are found within it. So plasma, this watery substance, if you spin it in a centrifuge and you take out all the cells, it does look this colour. It does contain also hormones, salts, enzymes and plasma proteins. Now 97% of plasma itself is fluid, so you can see why blood is actually in liquid form. The next picture down shows red blood cells. So commonly called red blood cells, but the Latin name for it are erythrocytes. So erythrocytes, starting with the letters E-R-Y, eri, is Latin for red. And if you've looked at any of the other videos or you've done massage courses before, erythema is the reddening of the skin. So if you remember the term eri, and cyte is cell, erythrocyte is a red blood cell. Now have a look at the picture, and this is under a microscope. They are biconcave cells. So they're funny shaped cells. You don't get any other cells in the body that look like that. And that's to increase their surface area for diffusion of the gases. So these red blood cells contain hemoglobin, which carries the oxygen, and they live for around 120 days in the body. So 120 days, 3 to 4 months really. Everything in the body has its own lifespan. So the taste buds on your tongue live for around 9 days. Your hair, a single strand of hair can remain on your body from anything from 2 to 9 years. Bone cells last up to 10 years, but red blood cells only have a lifespan of up to 4 months. So if you donate blood, you'll find that you'll only be able to go a certain amount of times a year, because donating a pint of blood means it will take up to 4 months to actually get all the cells back up to your normal blood volume. If you donated every month, eventually you'd run out of blood. So that's red blood cells. And the next one down there, we're looking at the big white cell, and that's a white blood cell. So the proper name for a white blood cell is a leukocyte. Now, if you think of the word leukemia, leukemia is where the body produces too many white blood cells, and it starts to invade itself and damage good body cells. So leukocytes, these are special cells that engulf and digest bacteria and microbes. So they'll be getting rid of the things in the body that shouldn't be there. I'll show you actually a little diagram of how this works, just to help it sink in a little bit. So I want to plop this one down. Okay, get my mini whiteboard. So if I draw a white blood cell here, and in comparison I'm going to draw a red blood cell next to it. Okay, so white blood cells are a lot bigger, and I'm going to draw some microbes or some bacteria. So they're going around. They don't always look like that. Okay, they're going around the body trying to invade cells and damage cells. So this white blood cell has the ability to engulf and digest. And what it does is it can morph, it can change shape. So by engulfing and digesting, it's changing shape. Now it looks a little bit like a Pac-Man. It's not a mouth, but it can wrap up the invading microbes. So let's say now we have this bacteria in here, and the white blood cell has the ability to again morph and wrap itself around it. And then using chemical process, it will break down the bacteria, and then it will eventually get rid of that contents, which will be lost via however the body gets rid of its waste. So there's different ways to do that, and that's made it completely harmless. So that one white blood cell now has digested, engulfed and broken down the bacteria that shouldn't be in the body. Now if you've only got one white blood cell, but you have a whole army of bacteria that's got into the body, whether it's through a cut or through mucous membranes, as we know with current COVID, it can go in through eyes, nose, mouth, these mucous membranes. So let's say we have this whole army, but if you've only got one white blood cell, there's a lot more bacteria than white blood cells. So these white blood cells, these bacteria are going to cause damage inside the body and can make its host quite ill, depending on the sorts of bacteria. But this white blood cell has the ability to reproduce. So when one cell becomes genetically identical, it can split, become two genetically identical cells here. Not necessarily smaller, that's just the way I've drawn it. So that one white blood cell can become two. Those two then can split and divide and become four. And you can see how that happens. Now if you watch it on a Petri dish under a microscope, you will see that it goes really, really quick, and they multiply. Now, if you've got 5 bacteria there and you've got 5 white blood cells, then it's going to the battle's going to be pretty good, and the white blood cells are going to end up winning. The problem is where there's too much bacteria, or the white blood cells don't have the ability to divide as quickly and keep up with demand. Now, the process of that one white blood cell splitting and dividing, hopefully if you can remember back to the skin when I showed you that, is mitosis. Okay, so cell division. All right, put my lids back on and put this back up. Excuse me. Okay, we're back on. Right, so that was white blood cells, and that was how they help to engulf and digest. Lastly on the list here we have platelets. So platelets are specialised cells. Proper name, thrombocyte, and the word thrombo, if you think of thrombosis, is a blood clot. thrombocyte is a cell which can form clots. So this stops the blood leaving the body. So we've looked at 4 functions of blood, DRAC, and we've looked at the 4 main components of blood, being plasma and the 3 cells, red blood cells, white blood cells and platelets. Ratio, not that we're wanting to study maths as part of this course, but I thought this was quite interesting. So if you get your finger and you get a little pin and you can get a tiny little drop of blood on your fingertip, imagine how small it is, about millimetre cubed. In that one tiny droplet of blood on your fingertip, how many red blood cells do you think there are? This is where you fill in the gaps. Have a guess. Okay, some of you might have said 100, some of you may have said 1,000. There'd actually be 5 million red blood cells in that one tiny droplet of blood. Okay, it's not just red blood cells though, there's platelets. So again, in the same droplet of blood, there'd be about 400,000 platelets, and white blood cells would be 10,000. One droplet of blood would contain that. And in terms of ratio, then for every 1 white blood cell, you have 40 platelets and around 500 red blood cells, if the body is healthy. If there's bacteria, if it needs to engulf and digest and fight infection, then it's going to reproduce the amount of white blood cells, and that will be higher. So there's different types of white blood cells, or leukocytes. Leukocytes is the general name for these white blood cells. And you can see in the diagram there that we have monocytes, eosinophils, basophils, trying to read upside down here, lymphocytes and neutrophils. So out of the different types of leukocytes, these are individual sorts and they have slightly different jobs. But at the top there, I've written that the word phagocytes engulf and digest and break down foreign substances. Okay, so phagocytes are the cells that will go around and do the process that I showed you earlier on the mini whiteboard. The only one of those white blood cells that is not considered a phagocyte would be a lymphocyte. And when we look at the lymphatic system, as one of the next videos, you'll see the job that the lymphocytes have is a little bit different. Okay, so that's enough about blood. Let's move on to the heart. So the heart is a big muscle. If you've had a look at the muscular videos and the sliding filament video as well, I explained there were 3 types of muscle tissue. So the muscle tissue found attached to bone in the body, for example, your biceps, quadriceps, pecs, those body muscles, they are skeletal muscle tissue. So that was the main one that we looked at. This one we're going to have a look at, which is cardiac muscle tissue. And the other type of muscle tissue in the body is smooth, if you can remember that. And smooth was found in internal organs and also wrapped around the blood vessels. And if you remember what the process was called, where the blood vessels, nice big hole here, would constrict or dilate to allow more or less blood through. That was vasoconstriction and vasodilation. So the heart is made up of cardiac muscle tissue, and the heart itself has 4 main chambers. So you may remember these terms from when you would have studied anatomy back at school. And in the good old days, you may have done some dissections, and then they used to use pig hearts, they might still do. But to actually have a real heart in front of you, it doesn't ever look like the heart pictures or the heart diagrams you would see in a book. It's a lot harder to work out where the bits and pieces are. So the different chambers in the heart are the atria. One of them's an atrium, and the other 2 are ventricles, and the ventricles are the bigger ones found at the bottom. We'll have a look at a diagram in a minute. People resemble the heart size as being the size of your fist. So put your fist out here, and the heart sits underneath the sternum. Now, a lot of people think the heart's on the left side of the body, but what happens here, I just happen to have a heart with me. Let's turn it around this way. So the heart is quite central actually. It lies behind the sternum and then it will tilt slightly to the left. They say that in a male, let's use a male as an example for obvious reasons, the bottom left corner of the heart will be at a very similar position to the left nipple. Now, you can imagine how in females that might vary depending on sizes and age. So the heart lies in the centre and it is directed slightly to the left. And around the heart, or that makes up the heart and south, there are membranes. Again, when we looked at muscle and bone, we talked about the fascia. You may remember the term epimysium, perimysium or endomysium as being the wrappings around skeletal muscle tissue, and the word periosteum being the connective tissue surrounding a bone. So here we have three membranes that make up the heart or are found within or externally around the outside. So the first one is endocardium. So I've written endo in blue, endo being the prefix to the word. Endo is related to something quite deep within the body. So endomysium was the connective tissue found around one muscle fibre. Endocardium, therefore, is the connective tissue, you can see it here, found within. So it forms the barrier actually between the heart muscle itself and the blood that will rush through. So endocardium is the deepest connective tissue. Myocardium, the word myo refers to muscle, and the study of muscle is myology. So anytime you see the word myo relates to muscle, so this translates as muscle heart, and this, it's not really a membrane, but it's a section of the heart, it's the actual muscular tissue. And then the final one is the pericardium. So we don't have an epicardium here, we've got a peri. Peri meaning perimeter, and this pericardium will wrap, it's found, can't really see it too much in this picture, but it wraps the whole heart up around the outside. It's the fine connective tissue around the outside, which will keep it in place, so that when you're jumping up and down, it's not moving around, it's kept fixed within its place inside the thorax. So do remember those terms. In terms of exam questions, there's often a question on the different types of membrane. Okay, now we're going to label up a picture of the heart. So if you're doing this course with me, you'll already have this revision workbook, you'll have this diagram. If not, I suggest you copy it, you freeze it, or however you want to do it, but we're going to have a look through at the different labels, and then what I'm going to do is by the end of this video show you the way I would use to answer an exam question, and I would draw my own version of it and be able to label it up accurately. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to say with any anatomical picture or diagram is left is normally right and right is left. It's as though, so this heart here would be inside me, and the left side of me is the left side of this heart. As you're looking at it, you need to flip it round, it's the opposite. So the left side of the heart, which is this side, is the red side. Now red is symbolic for oxygenated blood, so fresh blood that's carrying oxygen around the body. The right side of the heart is the blue side. So you can see these tubes are blue, this tube's blue as well here. So whether it's red or blue, now blood isn't actually blue, all blood is red, but deoxygenated blood, all this blue side here, would be a deeper shade of red. It's just the way they show it in these diagrams. Okay, so red will tell us where it's going to go to, because if it's fresh oxygenated blood, it's going to go to the body cells. It's going to be pumped out to all the cells that need it, so to the brain, down to all your muscles, to skin, etc. The blue blood on this side, there's no point pumping blue blood out to body cells because it hasn't got a lot of oxygen in. So this blue blood is going to be heading to the lungs to pick up oxygen and turn red, if we think diagrammatically. will end up on this side before it then goes out to be delivered. Okay, so left is right, right is left. Red is oxygenated, blue is deoxygenated. Again, if you ever have to label up a diagram, arrows going into the heart. Okay, where you see these arrows going in, so we've got two there, we've got one here, and we've got one here. Arrows going in, I say, or I think of the term, they're going via the heart. Via the heart, therefore they're veins. So blood returning back to the heart is a vein. And blood going away, so we've got an arrow going out there, got arrows going out here. Okay, so if the arrow's going away, it's an artery. So veins go via and arteries go away. So remember these little terms, left and right, red and blue, and the arrows going in and out will help us to label it up. Now, the first one I'm going to label here is the aorta. So the aorta is a really thick artery that comes out the heart. It's coming from this side, so it's coming from the left ventricle, and it goes through this valve here, which we'll label up in a bit, and it curves around. It's going to take nice oxygenated blood around to the body, to areas that need it. Now on this one here, you can see coming out, there's a big archway, really thick blood vessel. It's probably thick as, or even thicker than the size of your thumb. So it's the largest artery of the body before it splits into smaller sections or arterioles. The next one we're going to label up is this arrow coming in. So if it's going via, it's a vein. I haven't called it a vein here, but it's a specialised vein called the vena cava or vena cava. The term superior means above or high, and therefore this one down here is going to be very similar, but the one lower down, so that's the inferior vena cava. Now the vena cava and vena cavae are veins, and they're taking deoxygenated blood back to the heart. So where do you think the vena cava have come from if they're carrying deoxygenated blood? So they're going to be coming from, so the aorta takes all the fresh blood out, and then eventually after it's passed on its oxygen, picked up carbon dioxide, then it's going to be travelling back through these vena cava here into this side, and this side is the right atrium. Goes down into the right ventricle before it's then pumped out this way through these vessels. Okay, we'll come on to those. So as the blood is pushed into the atria, the right atrium, it goes through this little valve here into the right ventricle. So that valve there is the tricuspid. Now I've put an asterisk next to it because it's also known as the atrioventricular valve. Okay, most commonly, and also in your exam or the assessment book that you may be using, it will term it tricuspid. What does tri mean? And what does cuspid mean? I like my little terms. Okay, so if we look at a cross-section of that valve, okay, it will be like that. And there's the centre of it, and it will look like so. Okay, so we've got three sections or three flaps, and as the blood rushes through this way, the flaps are gonna open and shut, open and shut. And when you hear a heartbeat, if you listen through a stethoscope, you'll hear it swooshing, whoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Okay, and that's the blood rushing through the valves there, so they open and shut, open and shut. The sound of the heart is termed lub-dub, 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 and what that is the valves shutting. So you can hear the valve shutting, which is the sound of the heartbeat. So the swishing is the blood going through, but the lub-dub would be the valve shutting there. So that's tricuspid, and then next up we have the septum. Now the septum here is a thick muscular wall that divides the ventricles. If you've heard of the term hole in the heart, in babies, there would be a hole between these two. So you would get these deoxygenated and oxygenated blood mixing, so that they would need an operation to stop that. The word septum itself actually means a dividing structure. So you do have a few septums in the body, and a more commonly known one is this one here. It's the nasal septum, which if you read, let's say, cheaper newspapers, you may see pictures of celebrities that at some point in their life have lost the septum here through too much recreational drugs, should we say. So a septum is a dividing structure, and the septum of the heart is dividing left and right ventricles. Okay, the next arrow up is here. Now we're looking at these two sets of valves. Okay, they are different because they're dividing, one's on the left side and one's on the right side, but they both have the same name. So they're both called semi-lunar valves. Again, use that for the exam in the assessment book, but you can be more specific with these terms. So this one could be called the pulmonary valve, and this one could be called the aortic valve. Okay, but the most common name for these valves are semi-lunar. And semi means half, lunar means the moon. So they're little half moon-shaped valves that prevent the backflow. Next up we have the valve here. So it's opposite to this one. So this with the tricuspid. And this one, instead of having 3 flaps, it's got 2 flaps. So that side is the bicuspid. Another name for the bicuspid is the mitral valve. Okay, so it has 2 names, but again, most common is bicuspid. And then we're going to move up. So we're on ventricles here, we're going up to the atria, and we're looking at these 2. So we've got arrows coming into the heart. So where it goes via the heart, it's a vein, and it's full of red blood. So where do you think this blood has come from, which is full of oxygen? Okay, so it's come from the lungs, and the term pulmonary refers to the lungs. Pulmonary veins. The pulmonary veins are bringing nice, fresh, oxygenated blood back to the heart. The next arrow is this one and this one. They're the same, from the same structure. So if we look here, that's the right side. It's deoxygenated blood. It's going away, so they've got to be arteries. And if they're deoxygenated blood, where do you think they're going? So they'll be going to pick up oxygen. So they're also going to the lungs. So they're your pulmonary arteries. Okay, and then finally, just in terms of your diagram, so you're quite clear on the chambers. Okay, left atrium, left ventricle, right atrium, right ventricle. Okay, so that's the diagram of the heart. Looking at that and trying to draw that yourself, it is quite complicated, but if you can understand how we label it up, the different colours, the left and right, the atrias, and at the end of this video I said I'm going to draw a version for you, which is a really good idea to use for the exam. If you're doing the VTCT exam, there's normally 60 questions in 60 minutes, so you've only got 1 minute a question. Now to draw a diagram of the heart, which can really help you with some of these questions, might take you a minute or 2, but if you've saved time on other questions, I'd definitely recommend being able to draw a diagram of the heart in a minute or less. Okay, let's move on. So flow of blood. If you follow one blood cell around the body, you'll find it actually goes through the heart twice, because it's going to pass through the deoxygenated side, the right side. Okay, goes through there, goes to the lungs, and then it's going to come back to the left side. So that one red blood cell will have passed through the heart twice on its entire journey through all the different body parts. But there are different flow names, okay, depending on where the blood is at the time. So general blood flow around the whole body, whether it's to the head, to the legs, arm, abdomen, etc., is called systemic flow of blood. I think of it as the whole body system. So systemic flow of blood is to the entire body. However, that can be broken down a bit further. The word pulmonary, we said, refers to the lungs. So pulmonary circulation is just the blood going to the left and the right lung, and to therefore pick up oxygen and bring it back to the heart. So that whole circulation of going from the heart to the lungs to pick up oxygen to coming back to the heart is the pulmonary circulation. This circulation down here, this circulation at the top to the head or to the lower areas is all systemic. But you also have blood flow to the heart itself. If I can show you this. Okay, can you see all the blood vessels around the outside of it? So the red and blue blood vessels. So the heart gets its own blood circulation from these blood vessels around the outside. So from the coronary arteries, it will get its blood flow because the heart is an organ and the heart needs stimulation. It needs oxygen itself to do its job. It can't get the oxygen from the blood it's pushing through the middle because the walls are too thick to actually diffuse through. So it gets it from these ones. Now, if you've got a bad diet, or you don't do a lot of exercise, or you smoke, or you drink a lot, and your lifestyle's not the best, especially eating lots of fatty food and having a build-up of cholesterol, if these coronary arteries around the outside get blocked, as in there's less diameter for the blood to pass through the middle, then you can have blockages, or it could actually stop that part of the heart from working. So if these get blocked here and it stops that part of the heart working properly, then the owner would suffer from a heart attack. Okay, so it's really important to keep your healthy lifestyle. So they would be the coronary arteries. And then the last one on here is the portal circulation, which is a specialised system that goes to the digestive organs. Okay, because if you think about it, it's the digestive organs that are breaking down the food into all the important food groups that the body needs to grow, to develop, to live. So you've got your amino acids, you've got your glucose, you've got all your minerals and vitamins. So that's referred to as the portal circulation. And there's a vein there called the hepatic portal vein. And the word hepatic refers to the liver. Again, if you've got your workbook, if you're doing this with me, you've got your workbook, you'll have this diagram to fill in. So we're just going to whiz through this. Excuse me. We'll start off with the pulmonary artery. So this diagram isn't that realistic in terms of the lungs don't sit up quite high above the heart, but in terms of being able to label this up, you need to understand where the blood flow is. So you've got all the blue blood here. It's going to the lungs to pick up oxygen to come back. Okay, so that's the pulmonary artery. This would be the pulmonary circulation. And that says it's the lungs at the top. You've got the vena cava. We said the vena cava were the main veins of the body that are taking deoxygenated blood back to the heart. So we've got the arrow coming up this way. It's taking all of that deoxygenated blood from all these organs back up here to then go to the lungs to pick up oxygen to come back. Hepatic vein. So I said hepatic related to the liver. We've got the liver here, so that would be all the veins and arteries supplying the liver there. And kidney. So if these are the kidneys, what name would this be? What vein would it be related to the kidneys? So the term renal relates to the kidneys. Renal failure you may have heard of as kidney failure. So the renal vein, and then we've got the artery. All the arteries are red on the other side. Hepatic portal artery, hepatic artery, aorta being this really big, thick blood vessel as the blood is pumped out, which supplies all these organs. So it's under really high pressure, the blood from the artery, the aorta. And then we've got the pulmonary vein at the top. Now, just as a bit of a side point or an add-on, all arteries in the body carry oxygenated or red blood. Okay. All veins of the body carry deoxygenated or blue blood. However, you can look at this diagram, you'll see that there is one exception. So if I say that again, all arteries in the body carry oxygenated blood. What would the exception be? And it's this specialised flow at the top. So all these arteries here are red, but this artery on this side is blue. Okay, because it's going to the lungs to pick up oxygen to therefore come back. And if I say all veins of the body carry blue blood or deoxygenated blood here, we can see the exception is the pulmonary vein, which is carrying red blood. So if you hear that sentence, there's always one exception, and the exception is the pulmonary circulation. Okay, blood vessels. So we've mentioned individual blood vessels, we've talked about veins and arteries. What we haven't mentioned are the other the other three terms. So we've mentioned arteries. Now when an artery splits and divides and it gets smaller and smaller, it's like the branches of a tree. So you can think of the aorta as being a tree trunk, and then as the tree trunk splits into smaller branches and then tiny little branches on the end, it gets smaller and smaller. So the artery could be the aorta or the tree trunk. A smaller version of that as it breaks down would be an arteriole. So eole on the end of something means a smaller version of it. So arteries are really high pressure. It's been pushed around the body. It breaks up into smaller branches called arterioles. And when these become the smallest tiny little blood vessels found anywhere in the body, these would be capillaries, which you'll have heard of that term. So it's only in capillaries where diffusion happens. And when we look at the respiratory system, we'll understand that process in a bit more detail. As diffusion happens and the body, the blood is getting rid of oxygen, supplying all the cells and picking up carbon dioxide and waste products, it then needs to be pumped back to the heart. Now, when these capillaries start to join up with other capillaries, they become quite small tubes that are then heading back to the heart. Now, we said blood vessels going via the heart are called veins, but the smaller veins are called venules. And then these venules will collate into veins, which will then become the vena cavas and will enter the heart again. So there are 5 different types of blood vessel. Now we're getting on to, this will sound a bit more complicated than what we've already talked about, the cardiac conduction system. In terms of exam questions, I've only ever seen a couple, and it's the order that this happens. So it's not the actual understanding of the process, it's not the physiology behind it, it's the anatomy, it's the labels of the bits and pieces found in the heart. So what we mean by cardiac conduction system is how the nerves tell the heart to work. It's that automatic beat of the heart and what stimulates what, so that the heart beats in a certain fashion. So if you've got this diagram, I'm going to label this one up, cardiac conduction system. Quick recap, what side's left, what side's right? Well, that's my heart because it's a diagram. So that's the left side here, and that's the right side. Left is red, right is blue. Ventricles at the bottom, atria at the top. That big red thing is going to be the aorta. Okay, we can see valves. You can see these things here. In fact, if you've heard the term heartstrings, or it pulls on my heartstrings are in fact these. It's the fascia inside that pull the valves open and shut. So the heart does have strings, but they're the attachments for the valves inside. So if you've watched muscles, I was talking about cardiac muscle, and I said the heart has its own intrinsic beat, it has its own inherent rhythm, and I gave an example of, not me personally, but cutting out an eel heart, and it's a Japanese delicacy. It was put on a spoon, and the eel heart, which was only the size of a pea, kept pulsating, okay, which lasted for about 20 to 30 seconds while it travelled down into the stomach. You could still feel it pulsating, which shows the ability the heart has to contract, even though it didn't have any stimulation, any nerve supply at all. So that heart wants to beat, but to keep it in a certain pace, it's got this conduction system. So the first thing we're going to label up at the top here is called the sinoatrial node, or the SA node. So that's the heart pacemaker. Okay, it's found on the right side, it's found in this right atrium, and that sets the beat of the heart. So that's coming from nerve stimuli from the brain, and it's sending out these rhythms. It's setting the heart pace. So as the right atrium beats, it's the first structure inside the heart that contracts. It sends this message down to this next part here, which is called the atrioventricular node, or the AV node. So the SA node is a heart pacemaker. As it contracts, as it's stimulated, it will send a rhythm down to the AV node, which sends this impulse down through the septum. Okay, we can see an arrow going over to this side. So the pacemaker will cause contraction of the two atria. So as the heart is beating, you will find these top atria squeezing first, and that will squeeze the blood from the atria through the valves into the ventricles at the bottom. So you get the first squeeze, relax, and then you get the ventricles squeeze, relax. And that is one heartbeat. 1, 2, relax, one heartbeat. The AV node sends this message down through the central fibres, and they're called the bundle of His. Bundle of His. We'll come on to that. It's got an asterisk there in a second. As it sends it down through the left and the right side, so that would be a left one and that would be a right one. They're the left and right bundle of branches. And it goes down and it will tell the walls of the ventricles, either side here, to contract. So we've had the atria contracting, message going down through the septum, and then it will tell these ventricles to contract. And the fibres that are going through the ventricles are called the Purkinje fibres. Purkinje fibres. So Purkinje was Dr. Purkinje who discovered they were in the heart. I had a look at bundle of His to see where that came from, and bundle of His are specialised muscle fibres named after the cardiologist Wilhelm His back in 1893. So these clever doctors put their names to these different parts of the conduction system. In terms of exam questions, it might say, what is the order of conduction in the heart? And if it's multiple choice, it might give you these terms. Okay, and as long as you are writing it in the correct order. So we start with a pacemaker at the top here, the SA, then the AV, then through this middle section, and the last thing that it will be stimulated through is the Purkinje fibres. Okay, we're nearly done, we're doing well, keep going. Blood pressure. So your blood pressure might be going up a bit now as you're thinking of the exam, if you've got an exam coming up. But what is blood pressure? So blood pressure is the force exerted on the blood vessel walls. It's the force exerted. People with high blood pressure, if you think instead of having a nice open artery, if it's clogged up with cholesterol and fatty deposits, there's going to be less space for the blood to flow through. If there's less space, the pressure is going to be a lot higher, and that high blood pressure then can cause problems. So high blood pressure isn't very good. Stress can lead to high blood pressure as well. So blood pressure is the force. There are two different parts of blood pressure. There's systole, or systole, and this is the contraction phase of the heart. So as the heart beats, you've got the atria, you've got the ventricles. That actual contraction phase of the heart is the systolic phase. And because it's the contraction, it's going to be a high number. So when we have a look at the blood pressure readings, it's the highest number on the reading. You'll have two numbers. As the atria contract, the ventricles contract, and then the whole heart relaxes and fills up with blood, ready to go again. That is the diastolic phase, or diastole. Okay, it's the relaxation phase of a heartbeat, which allows it to refill, ready for the next beat. So do remember those terms. Blood pressure is the force exerted, systole is the contraction phase, diastole is the relaxation phase. If you've had your blood pressure taken, a doctor may tell you what your reading is. You might not have a clue whether it's good or bad. Hopefully, if it's good, they'll tell you, yeah, it's great, keep going. And if it's not, they should explain why. but this chart shows you some figures. So the top chart here shows you low blood pressure, and this one is your high blood pressure. Another word for high blood pressure is hypertension, and there's different stages. And low blood pressure is hypotension. A normal blood pressure reading is 120/80. Okay, when I say normal, sorry, optimal, a good healthy blood pressure is 120/80. As the whole country's BP and we're not as healthy as we used to be, and obesity is a bit of a concern as well, it's got normal there has actually increased. So a normal blood pressure reading is 130/85. However, a healthy blood pressure would be 120/80. As we go even higher, you can see the stage 3 hypertension at the bottom, 180/110. If you saw anyone with a blood pressure of that reading, they would be having palpitations, they would have, they wouldn't be able to breathe properly, their heart rate would be really rapid, they'll be sweating, they'd probably look quite clammy. So they're all symptoms of a high blood pressure. Okay, and they'd, if they were up there at number 3, they would have to go to hospital quite quickly, I think. Okay, cardiovascular terms that you might come across are stroke volume. If you think of a stroke as a beat, okay, one stroke is a beat. So a stroke volume would be the amount of blood the heart pumps in one beat. Okay, the volume of blood. So in one heartbeat, think of the atria and the ventricle contracting, pushing out blood through the veins, and they'd be pushing out between 60 and 100 millilitres of blood per heartbeat. So stroke volume, think of stroke as a beat and volume as the amount per beat. Heart rate, pretty simple term, it's the amount of times the heart beats in a minute. Average 60 to 80. If you wear any of your Fitbits or your special watches that we all like wearing and checking your heart rate and checking your steps and things, have a look at what your resting heart rate is, because a proper resting heart rate is worked out when we're sleeping. Mine at the moment, mine varies between 45 and 56, I think, as a resting heart rate, which is pretty good. When I'm exercising, even when I'm going out jogging, my heart rate can go up to about 180 beats per minute. So there's a massive range, but a fairly normal, healthy resting heart rate is 60 to 80 beats. So have a check at what yours is. And the final term there is cardiac output. So cardiac output is stroke volume times, we'll do like our maths here, heart rate. Okay, if you times the two, you're thinking of how much blood is pumped out per minute instead of per one beat. Okay, and an average, you're looking at 4 to 8 litres per minute. Okay, think of your kitchen jug when you're measuring out things, and a nice big jug is about a litre. So you can have up to 8 of those jugs of blood being pumped through the heart every minute. Okay, so the heart is one of the hardest working things in the body. And then to finish off with, factors that can affect your blood pressure. I mentioned stress earlier. I mentioned bad diet as well, actually. Just have a little think. You want to pause me for 30 seconds. What other things can affect your blood pressure? Whether it's things that will increase it or decrease it. And I'm going to put those up on the screen now. So exercise will increase it. So if you have your blood pressure taken mid-exercise, it's going to be high. However, if you do exercise lots at rest, it will probably be a lot lower or more healthy, because you're exercising the heart, which is a muscle, which is really important. Medication. So certain medications you can have to increase or decrease it depending. Alcohol will raise your blood pressure along with smoking. Nutrition is up there to think of. You know, there are good diets and bad diets, and bad diets full of fatty food and cholesterol-rich food is going to be bad for your blood pressure. So stick to your healthy diets. Certain medical conditions, stress is bad for every body system, but for blood pressure in particular. Massage, how does massage affect blood pressure? Okay, have a think. You've got someone lying on the couch for an hour and they are having a, let's say, pretty firm massage. It's not a pre-event though, it's an hour sports massage. They're lying down. What will massage do to your client's blood pressure? Will it increase it or decrease it? So when you're massaging your client, who's doing the work? Okay, you as the therapist, you're working really hard to do your hour treatment. So the person on the couch, already being horizontal, lying down, their blood pressure is going to lower slightly anyway. And because you're doing the work, you're helping to push the blood around the body. The heart's not having to go, oh, I've got to be quicker to push it all around. The heart actually chills out, so your pulse rate will drop. The therapist is helping the blood flow. So generally speaking, massage will decrease blood pressure, which is why after an hour massage, some people feel a bit lightheaded, or when they get up, they might feel a bit dizzy. So it's a slow process at the end. Get them sat up slowly, get them a drink of water. And posture. Posture, when you're standing, because you've got gravity to fight against, think of your heart here and think of where your feet are. For blood to come all the way up through the body from your feet up against gravity, it's hard work. So blood pressure is going to be highest when you're standing. When you're sat, medium. When you're lying, it's going to be at its lowest. So different body positions can affect blood pressure as well. Okay. What I'm going to do for the last, I don't know how long this will take, I'll time myself, is to draw a picture of the heart, a diagram. Okay, let's get my pens ready. I'm not racing, however, because I'm going to be annotating it. But in an exam, I could draw this in about 30 seconds, and this would help me with any exam question that I have on where does blood go through, where does it pass through, or where does it come from, or where does it go to next after. Okay, so let's use this pen first, see how this works. Let me get in position, hold on a sec. Got to keep remembering I'm left-handed, what side to sit. Okay, let's hope that works. So I'm going to draw the heart, which looks something like that, and divide it into the 4 sections, and that is my heart. So I'm going to label it up, left and right. Okay, left and right. Left and right. Okay, just double checking I don't get it wrong. Left is red, right is blue. So already that will give me lots of answers. Red is oxygenated, blue is deoxygenated. Now from this left side, we're going out through that big arch. Now because I've got a whiteboard, I can rub bits and pieces out, which is really useful. So that is my aorta. Blood's going out through the aorta. Okay. Now where does that blood go through? Where does it go to? From the aorta, deep, rich blood, red blood. I'm going to just draw, I'll carry it on here and draw it down here, keep it out the way and say it's gone there. Now that is the body. It could be anywhere. It could be the head, it could be the toes, it could be the arms. But that red blood from the aorta will eventually get to all different parts of the body. Okay, that's still red. Now, once it gets to the body, it's delivering its oxygen and its nutrients to different cells, and therefore it's going to pick up carbon dioxide and waste. So this coming through this way is going to be blue. And it ends up in the right atrium. Okay, so that's an arrow now going into the heart here. And what colour blood is that? That's blue blood. Okay. Blue blood coming back to the heart is a vein. It's the vena cava. I'm just going to call it VC. That's the right side, that's the left side. Okay, so VC is vena cava. I haven't drawn a superior or inferior because it'll make my diagram too complicated. So vena cava is just coming back from the head of the body. It will then pass through a little valve here. Okay, we've got a little valve on this side. As it comes through, it's going to go into the right ventricle. Let me just write RV and LV, just to remind us, and RA and LA. Okay, that will remind us. So I'm nearly done actually. So from here it goes through that valve and then it needs to work its way out somewhere. So it's going to come from here and it's going to come up through this tube this way, like so. And that is going to go to the lungs. So I'm going to draw a pair of lungs at the top. Okay, there's my pair of lungs. And the pair of lungs are going to provide the blood with rich red oxygenated blood, and it's going to come back here to that way. That's coming in. Okay, so let me just annotate those bits. It's really not very neat for me trying to do it this way. Lungs, let's colour a bit in. So blue blood here, this is red blood. It picks up red blood from the lungs, and this blue blood is coming from the body there. And last thing is just to label up these structures. So this is going away, so that's an artery, and it's going to the lungs, so it's a pulmonary artery. I'm going to call it PA. And this one from the lungs that's going into the heart is a pulmonary vein. Pulmonary vein. Okay, and the only other thing I haven't got on here is the valves. So on this left side we had the tricuspid, and on the right side we had the bicuspid, and then the other two sets of valves were found in the middle. They had the same name. Remember what those were called? They were called, I'm going to call them SL, semi-lunar. Okay, now that probably took me about 2 or 3 minutes to explain it, but what I want you to do is really good practice to be able to draw something like that yourself and do it in under a minute. Okay, and if you can do that, that would answer. If there was a question in the exam that said, where does blood go to after entering the heart in the vena cava, or what chamber of the heart does blood arrive at from the vena cava? Look at this diagram, my atrium. It might say after the left atrium, where does the blood exit the heart? So you'd follow this around and go aorta. So it is a really useful thing to be able to do. Okay. So we got there. That was nearly an hour today, but please watch it as many times as you need to. And good luck. If you're one of my students, have a look at the exam questions at the end of the PowerPoint that I will send you, and practice the diagram. Okay, that will really help. All right, thank you. See you on the next system.